good friend, Andy Staples of On 3. Andy, good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
Andy, first of all, you guys have a new time, and you have a new co-host. Ari Wasserman has joined you. Enjoyed all the reaction content that came from you guys at On 3 on YouTube over the weekend. Let's start there, Andy. Where can people find you? And for those unfamiliar with Ari's work, first of all, shame on you. Secondly, what do you love about him as your co-host now?
Oh, he's the best, and it's not just because, we're arguing about gas station food most of the time, but he's one of those guys that always has a very interesting view of the world. Like, he sees the world differently. This is the reason we had a segment on the L show. So Ari and I worked together at The Athletic, and we did a show together. And I went over to On 3, and he still was under contract. So the plan was we were going to get back together. But we always had so much fun on that old show, and we would do stuff like, there's a segment, and we'll be doing it probably not as much in season because we've got a lot of football to talk about, but we just randomly, what's in Ari's search history? And it is fantastic because there is no telling what is going to come up. Now, usually it's at least PG, but you're gonna go, what? And of course the combination of the things. But we are very blessed to have him because he's one of those guys that sort of understands what a fan base is thinking. Like, it's funny because I'll talk to Ari about a game or something, and then I'll go on a message board for that team that we were talking about, and he's got the pulse of the fan base figured out, and so it'll be fun to argue and watch this season unfold, because he and I spent 2 years arguing over the college football playoff, because I said this 12-team thing is going to be awesome. He said it's going to take away from the regular season. He has now since admitted I'm right, which is good. It's always good to admit I'm right. Mm-hmm. But no, we had a lot of fun this weekend. We went to the Florida-Miami game together. He had, he's been not working for 6 weeks, so he has so many takes just bubbling inside him. And we are now on at 8:30 Central every morning. And I am happy because I'm not a morning person, and this is when I would have been on right now with the old time. But we've moved to 8:30 Central Monday through Thursday during the season, and then we have a 10:30 Central PM show to wrap all the games up on Saturday nights. So you got your morning show during the week, and you got your post-game show on the weekend.
I love it. Andy Staples of On 3 with us here on Ramon, Kayla, and Will. So, Andy, let's start at the game you were at on Saturday. What stood out the most from the Florida perspective in their blowout loss to Miami?
What have they been doing for 9 months? I think that's the biggest question. And they had basically been saying, Billy Napier had been saying, oh, this is going to be a better team. This is a better roster. Now, we knew it wasn't a better roster because we have eyes and we can follow what happened in the transfer portal. They lose their best pass rusher, Princely Manuel, to Ole Miss. They lose one of their best running backs, Trevor Etienne, to Georgia. Nobody they brought in the transfer portal was of that caliber. So to tell people the roster's better was not true, and everybody knew that. But, the thought was maybe they developed some guys, maybe the chemistry was good, and they get out there and just get annihilated. And it's one of those, the way they got annihilated, it's very hard to believe them when they say, oh, that wasn't us, we just made mistakes. No, they got pulverized by Miami's offensive line. Their defensive line could get no pass rush. Florida's offensive line couldn't run the ball, couldn't protect Graham Mertz, who now has a concussion. And Ruben Bain, who is Miami's best pass rusher, he got hurt first play of the game. So Miami was doing all that without one of their best players. And when you look at what Florida has coming up, they've got Texas A&M, not this week, but next week. They've got to play Kentucky. They've got to play Tennessee. They've got to play Georgia, LSU, Texas, Ole Miss. You just wonder how they're going to be able to handle any of that.
On 3's Andy Staples with us this morning talking college football. Andy, we'll stay in South Florida real quick, man, and watching what Florida was able to do. When you look at it, is there at a point right now, if you're Billy Napier and you have Graham Mertz out, do you go with the young 5-star and DJ Lagway moving forward? Because, again, you look at his situation right now, and I think that seat is starting to get hot when you lose the way you do in the swamp. Do you start doing that?
No, I mean, I think everybody thinks it's over for Billy.
Oh, it's over.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to need a miracle. He's going to have to win some of these big games coming up, and I don't see how they're going to do it. But with Mertz out, I think they don't really have a choice. If he can't play against Sanford, they're going to have to start DJ Lagway. The question is, do you keep starting him after that? And I think a lot of it would depend on how he performs. I think the idea would be to bring Mertz back when he's healthy, but if DJ comes in and looks great, then that's a different story. And he played some on Saturday and looked all right. He did lead a touchdown drive toward the end of the game. He also threw an interception to a guy who was laying on his back. So it was a freshman experience.
It was. And there's always the old saying, you can't lose your job to an injury, but that'll tell a whole lot about Billy Napier if he does choose to go with a young guy, because to your point, there may be a Hail Mary pitch to try to save his job, man. It's fascinating on watching that kind of unfold here. And that same sentence, man, watching what Georgia did to Clemson, are we supposed to believe that Dabo's a really good coach, or is Georgia really that good? Which one is it?
I think it's a little bit of both, because I don't know that this Georgia team is as talented as the two that won the national titles a couple of years ago. I think they're good, and they're very, one of the better teams in the country this year, can compete for the national title this year, but they don't have as many aliens as they had on those teams, and the fact that Clemson couldn't do anything against them just tells us Clemson's no longer in Georgia's league. And I think we knew that because Dabo just won't use the transfer portal, but this was what probably needed to happen to drive that point home, that listen, you have to use the portal in today's day and age, or everybody's going to build better rosters than you. Because Dabo has recruited great out of high school. They still have very good players. That Clemson defense is really good. It just got worn out because the offense couldn't do anything. They kept having this, face the Georgia offense again and again and again. And, it's not like they're not getting good players out of high school. They are. But the problem is when you got teams like Georgia and Ohio State that if they have even the slightest roster deficiency, they go get somebody out of the portal. And Clemson just doesn't do that. Well, you saw what happens when you let that happen for 4 or 5 years, or I guess 3-4 years now. And it won't work. It might work in the ACC. Like Clemson might still be able to win the ACC, maybe. But when they play teams like Georgia that have just been reloading their roster and making it as perfect as they can make it, they're never going to have a chance.
Andy Staples of On3 kind enough to join us on this Labor Day. Andy, let's head over to the West Coast and Vegas. We all were treated with that game last night. Brian Kelly obviously boiled over in his post-game press conference, going on about how Miller Moss outplayed them. But overall, Andy, when you look at this type of game, what worries you about LSU and what excites you about USC?
Well, BK's got to stop scheduling or playing anything. I know that athletic director schedules them, but that's 3 in a row at LSU. Yeah. 2 against Florida State and this one that he's lost. And if you remember correctly, his last year in Notre Dame, they had the Monday night game at Florida State, the Labor Day game at Florida State, and that was a not great Florida State team. And they knocked Jordan Travis out of the game. Mackenzie Milton had to come in, and they still pushed Notre Dame to overtime. That was when Brian Kelly, messed up the John McKay line. Are you in favor of or how do you feel about your team's execution? I'm in favor of it. And he tried to say that on the field after the game.
Yes.
And so these are not for him. Like, he needs to play game one on a Saturday where there's a bunch of other games going on, and we're just sort of not paying attention, and get a win, get a W, so you can get into a season this way. I actually don't worry that much about it. I didn't know that LSU would be better on defense. I wasn't sure when they hired Blake Baker, and they didn't really upgrade much personnel-wise through the portal. But I thought they did okay on defense. I thought they were fine. I actually was just more impressed with USC because I thought Miller Moss would be good because I saw him in the bowl game last year, and I trust Lincoln Riley's decision-making when it comes to quarterbacks. And so Miller Moss is great. Offense looked great. But the thing that stood out to me was USC making open field tackles, USC with a goal line stand. Like, they could play some defense. And if USC can play some defense, we can look at them through an entirely different lens. Now, the question with all these games, and I said this all off season, and I still fell into the trap last night. Like, if you watch our reaction show, I'm like, USC is going to go to the playoffs. But the thing about it is, you got to remember, like, I covered that Texas Notre Dame game in 2016, the one where Joe Tessitore was like, Texas is back. And it turned out Notre Dame was 4-8 and Texas was 5-7. So it's possible that that's what we saw last night, but I don't think so. I think USC is going to have a better defense. And look, that defense is going to have to be great, because there are going to be some games where their offense, as good as it is not going to be able to produce a lot of points, because they're playing Michigan, they're playing Penn State, they're playing Notre Dame. Those are elite defenses.
So, Andy, I know that you liked Oregon coming into the season, and watching that game against the FCS Idaho Vandals was probably not pleasant for many Duck fans on Saturday night. What did you see in that game that maybe made them play, not as great as they should have? Did they just not come in, with that passion to play against an FCS school? I can't quite put my finger on exactly what happened in that game.
Yeah, it just didn't feel like they were clicking. It was a little sloppy. And they've got Boise State on Saturday. Yep. And so Boise State went to Georgia Southern, and Ashton Genty had one of the greatest games you'll ever see, where he ran for like 260 yards and 6 touchdowns. If Oregon comes out on Saturday the way they did this past Saturday, they're gonna lose. So hopefully Dan Lanning has impressed that upon them, because obviously they're one of the more talented teams in the country. But that was very sloppy. I have some friends, Dan Rubenstein and Ty Hildebrand, the Solid Verbal podcast, and they have a saying called "Win your clunkers," because everybody has one during the year. Maybe this was their clunker, but we'll see. Because if Boise State is competitive against them, or beats them, we have to completely reevaluate this Oregon team.
Andy Staples of On 3 is our guest here on Ramon, Kayla, and Will. Andy, here in Nashville, Clark Lee and Vanderbilt get the job done against Virginia Tech. Diego Pavia has the kind of swagger that no one on that sideline has had since James Franklin. How significant was this result for you, and what does it say about this new-look Vandy team that's got 51 new players on that roster from this year versus last season?
This is Clark Lee's biggest win as the head coach, and it was incredible. And I remember when they hired Jerry Kill, who was New Mexico State's coach last year, as a consultant, and you find out that Diego Pavia is coming. I was like, oh, now this is going to be fun, because if you watch Diego Pavia in New Mexico State last year, I think there are probably a lot of people only saw them in the Auburn game when they went to Auburn and beat them. But he'd been doing that for a couple of years there. And that is a place where it was viewed as a place where you could not win. You could never win. And he was swaggy. I mean, this is a guy who they got him. They were not going to let New Mexico State practice in the indoor facility in New Mexico before their bowl game, because there was film of Diego Pavia peeing on the New Mexico logo, because they are rivals, of course. And so this is a guy that is going to come in and immediately command the respect of his teammates, and you saw why. Like, you saw against Virginia Tech why everybody loves him, why he's so much fun to watch. And the thing about Clark Lee and company, Ari actually mentioned this on the show the other night, and it's true, because Ari and I both know Barton Simmons very well, who used to work for 24/7 and is now their director of personnel. They came in with a really good plan to build the roster. Well, the way the rules changed sort of affected everybody. Nobody could know how that was going to work. Vandy's become the farm team for the rest of the SEC, but basically, if you get good at Vandy, some other SEC team is going to steal you. For example, London Humphreys caught a touchdown for Georgia this weekend. Like, that's what happens. If you have a good year at Vandy, everybody in the SEC recruits you. So they've had to deal with that. And you mentioned over 50 new players, because that's what's going to happen every year. Is every time they get somebody good, they're going to get stolen. And so to just keep your head down, keep going, and build a roster that can beat a Virginia Tech, that's very impressive.
No doubt, man. Will and I both made our way up to Knoxville this weekend, too. I just want to know if you got an opportunity to see one of the guys that broke the first NIL bank, and Nico Iamaleava. What did you think of him?
I thought he looked great. I've said this all off season. I went up there in the spring and talked to some people and came away with the thought that this is going to be a very different offense than what you saw last year with Joe Milton. It's going to be a lot closer to what Hendon Hooker was doing, and then you've got a guy who probably has a bigger skill set than Hendon Hooker. So the ceiling for Nico and for Tennessee is really, really high. Now, we are going to get a look at them against a more challenging opponent with NC State this week, but I saw Western Carolina moving the ball on NC State. I would think Nico can do that too. Just the way he can improvise and the way he can run RPO type stuff, he can handle a read. Joe, just as great as Joe's arm was, there were some things he couldn't do very well that very much limited their offense. Tennessee has the whole field available to it now on offense, and you're going to see what a big difference that makes.
Andy Staples joined us this morning on RKW. Andy, really quickly, when it comes to Alabama, quietly, because not a lot of people are discussing them after this weekend, but, you talk about dominating, clearly doing that against Western Kentucky. Are we sleeping a little on Alabama? I know not everybody is, but they're not as talked about as they have been under the Nick Saban regime. Yeah,
I think people thought Kalen Moore would get there, and they just couldn't possibly be as good as they were under Nick Saban because he's the greatest of all time. But I went up there in the spring and looked around and saw that roster and was like, oh my God, they still have a ton of aliens on this team. It is a loaded roster. And what's crazy is they lost Caleb Downs to Ohio State, who is the best safety in the country. But a lot of the replacements that Kalen DeBoer made, like he brought in his center Parker Brailsford from Washington. They've done a really good job of filling the holes they needed to fill. And then what they had already, like the offensive line was already really good, especially in the run game. Justice Haynes and Jan Miller, the two backs. And then building the offense around Jalen Milroe. I mean, remember this time last year, they still didn't know if Milroe was their guy. So the Saban staff and Tommy Rees, who was the offensive coordinator last year, weren't really calling plays for him. That accentuated the things he did best. That didn't start happening until like week 4. This year, everything's been built around Milroe since they got there. And I think that makes a big difference.
Great point.
Andy Staples, he is with On3. Andy and Ari On3 available wherever you download podcasts, live on their YouTube feed, 8:30 Central, Monday through Thursday, reacting on weekends as well. Andy, great to talk some college football with you again. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
yes, sir.
Andy.
Andy Staples with us this morning, going around the country. Really enjoyed their reaction show over the weekend. That is a must listen for the college football fan in your life. 615-737-1045. We have not yet played the audio of Brian Kelly literally pounding the table last night after LSU's most recent Week 1 loss. We'll have that for you.